Let me move to the last part of the opening segment, and maybe also the beginning of the next segment, right? Because WTO Secretariat, represented by Anabel Gonzales, is going to provide us with opening remarks and also give us a state of play in terms of the preparation of the ministerial conference. So Anabel, we're always very happy to have you and benefit from your expertise. I'm happy to give you the floor. I've seen your name, so I think you're here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. I'm delighted to be here. Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, our dear colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me to this regional consultation in preparation for the WTO 12 Ministerial Conference. For the past 70 years, global trade has been governed by a set of rules centered on non-discrimination, transparency, and binding and enforceable commitments on tariff and other policy instruments, which have brought greater certainty and increased market openness. Throughout this period, an increasingly global framework of trade rules has helped create an unprecedented extent of global prosperity, helping to raise living standards around the world. Many countries have shared into this prosperity, as have many people, particularly in this part of the world. The high point of global governance was reached in mid-1990s with the creation of the WTO, where countries committed not just to an expanded and improved GATT, but actually to a new era of global economic cooperation. The WTO expanded in number to become a quasi-universal organization, but also in quantitative terms, with the accession of China, Russia, and Vietnam. Today, it covers 98% of trade, and it has enhanced the rule of law in trade relations, with over 500 cases brought to the dispute settlement mechanism and countless additional conflicts prevented. But reaching agreement at the multilateral level has become elusive. There have been some successes, as the expansion of the Information Technology Agreement, the negotiation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and the elimination of agricultural export subsidies. But clearly, it has not been possible to pursue deeper international cooperation, which has resulted in some very old and also very new issues remaining unaddressed at the global level. Preferential trade agreements have to some extent filled the vacuum, but only partially. Now, beyond the pandemics, from geopolitics to geoeconomics, from climate change to digitalization, from social tensions to increased nationalism, increased risks and challenges will reshape the global trade and investment landscape. A rules-based trading system that provides predictability and certainty with a revitalized WTO at its core will become even more relevant to support countries as they navigate a complex external environment and continue to leverage trade for sustainable and inclusive growth. So the months ahead offer a critical window of opportunity to reinvigorate the WTO. By delivering results between now and our 12th Ministerial Conference in November, WTO members can break with a recent history of deadlock and give a valuable boost to the global economic recovery. Now, I have been asked to provide some thoughts on the current state of affairs in preparation for MC12, on key recent developments, and on major issues that will be up for consideration by ministers in December. And let me start by commending the ESCAP's Regional Consultation Initiative, the variety and pertinence of the topics covered during this event, the quality of the speakers that will intervene, and the participants provide a great opportunity for Asian and Pacific countries to contribute to capacity building in the region. I also want to thank the participating Asia Pacific members for the importance that they attach to enhanced multilateral cooperation, including in the area of trade, and in what has been everyone's main objective this past month, the fight against COVID-19. So addressing the pandemic is an issue of the utmost importance for the entire WTO membership and for our new Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. A collective multilateral WTO-driven response to the pandemic is a moral imperative. We know lives are at stake, but it's also an issue of practical and economic concern. With this objective in mind, discussions at the WTO have been intensifying in the past few months. WTO members have submitted a plethora of communications covering a large breadth of issues and including strategic areas such as export restrictions, trade facilitation, the role of services, transparency and monitoring, cooperation between relevant international organizations and other key stakeholders, as well as a potential framework to respond effectively to future pandemics or other crises. Regarding the transfer of technology, know-how, and intellectual property, including the waiver of the trade-related intellectual property agreement, these discussions are also ongoing within the TRIPS Council, where WTO members have recently started text-based negotiations. In particular, I wish to briefly touch upon the crucial issue of equitable access to vaccines, which ought to be tackled. We know that trade is key in efforts to scale up vaccine production and distribution. That is why the WTO has partnered with the WHO, the IMF, and the World Bank in a multilateral leaders task force on COVID-19 to track, coordinate, and advance delivery of COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. The objective is to work with governments and partners at the global and local level to address finance and trade barriers to ensure that vulnerable populations have access to these life-saving tools. There are several actions that WTO members can consider to create a conducive trading environment for vaccine development, such as freeing up vaccine supply chains by facilitating trade and reducing export restrictions, and identifying and addressing supply chain bottlenecks with manufacturers to increase vaccine production and distribution, particularly in developing countries and least developed in particular. By MC12 in December, a framework for COVID-19 and future health crisis could be on the table for consideration by ministers. Should WTO members agree on such a framework this year, whenever the next crisis comes, these debates will not have to be repeated and all of our attention would be aimed at saving lives. Now, there are other areas where action at the WTO is expected at MC12. Concluding the fisheries subsidies negotiation and an outcome on agriculture are at the top of members' priorities. On both fronts, negotiations have been very active, and we very much welcome the efforts that are being made. On fisheries subsidies, the chair of the negotiations introduced a revised draft text in June. And on July 15, 104 ministers came together virtually and provided the political impetus to work on the basis of the chair's draft text and to do what is necessary to advance the negotiations towards the finish line. I am aware that this is a vital issue for ESCAP members, and in particular, small island developing states of the Asia-Pacific region. We remain positive. I believe in particular that we are moving towards an agreement that would be beneficial for the well-being of our oceans, for the livelihood of fisher women and men across the globe, and for public budgets. On agriculture, the chair of the negotiations recently introduced a draft negotiating text aimed at facilitating consensus among members and seeking potential landing zones. The topics under consideration include domestic support, market access, export restrictions, export competition, cotton, public stockholding for food security purposes, a special safeguard mechanism, and transparency as a cross-cutting issue. Hunger and food insecurity have been on the rise as a result of the pandemic. An MC12 package on agriculture could respond to these food security concerns on public stockholding, as well as World Food Program purchases for humanitarian purposes, while also taking steps on transparency and domestic support. Intensive text-based negotiations will begin actually today. And here I wish to highlight that a collective sense of urgency, goodwill, and flexibility will be required to build convergence, to avoid repeating long-standing positions, and to achieve a credible outcome on agriculture and on fisheries, bearing in mind the broader objective of positively impacting people's lives. Now, addressing the appellate body impasse is at the top of members' priorities for MC12. This is well known. And I also know that this is a priority for countries in this part of the world. Members should aim to reach an agreement on the kinds of reforms they wish to realize for the dispute settlement system, so that all pillars of the WTO can work better for member governments and for the people they represent. A post-MC12 work program or roadmap has been suggested as a potential deliverable in December to resolve this underlying issue and restore confidence in a binding, fully functional dispute settlement system at the WTO. But the broader topic of dispute settlement could also be seen in light of the broader discussions on WTO reform, where members have also expressed a certain interest for a ministerial outcome. With this in mind, efforts could be geared towards centralizing the numerous topics, submissions, and proposals that members believe could be encompassed by WTO reform. They could cover issues such as enhancing the WTO's negotiating function, notifications, and monitoring, as well as other potential institutional improvements that could benefit the entire membership and enable the organization to be fit for purpose, to be better equipped to address contemporary challenges. Such challenges may also include finding ways for the WTO to remain relevant in a global economy that has been increasingly shifting towards digital trade. Decisions on the 1998 work program on e-commerce and on maintaining the practice of not imposing customs duties on electronic transmissions, the moratorium, have been a regular feature at past ministerial conferences. And at MC12, it is therefore likely that these elements will be up for consideration again, and their fate depends on the ability of members to find consensus. When making their decisions, members should bear in mind the importance of e-commerce and how it has been evolving very strikingly during the pandemic. COVID-19 has accelerated the growth of this sector of the economy, and the role that e-commerce is likely to play in global economic recovery should not be omitted. We also know that it is important to help to bridge the digital divide and for the WTO to support and strengthen the enabling environment for e-commerce. I'm also aware that the ESCAP regional consultation is attaching great importance to strengthening the capacity of least developed countries in the multilateral trading system. Earlier this summer, WTO members reached consensus on extending the TRIPS transition period for LDCs until 2034. This is an important decision, which was made ahead of MC12 and in recognition of LDC's special requirements and constraints and their need for flexibility to create a viable technological base. Discussions on other LDC matters at the WTO are ongoing in various formats and on various topics, such as the LDC proposal on graduation to support a smooth transition from the LDC to the developing country status, and the LDC services waiver and its operationalization, aiming to provide preferential treatment to services and services suppliers from LDCs and increase their participation in global services trade. However, whether this or other LDC issues will be ripe for an outcome at MC12 remains to be seen and depends largely on members. Now, at MC12, the participants of the various member-led initiatives are also likely to aim for deliverables, whether through the form of a declaration, stock-taking, or by obtaining guidance from their ministers on future work. Significant progress has been made in several bilateral negotiations among a group of members launched in Buenos Aires in 2017. In the case of the Joint Statement Initiative on Services Domestic Regulation, it seems very likely that the group will be ready to announce an agreement in the ministerial. Significant progress is also expected on investment facilitation for development, where over 100 countries are looking at setting up a more transparent, efficient and investment-friendly business climate, but making it easier for domestic and foreign investors to invest, conduct their day-to-day business, and expand their existing investments. Meanwhile, this is a critical year as well for the Joint Statement Initiative on e-commerce. Members have been intensifying the pace of the talks with the view to delivering on the goal of substantial progress by MC12, guided by the co-conveners who are precisely from this region, Australia, Singapore, and Japan. Real advancement has also been seen on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises with the aim to support their role in international trade. And participants on the Initiative on Trade and Gender are also working hard to prepare a potential concrete outcome document for MC12. New initiatives were also launched in 2020 to intensify work on trade and the environment, focusing on trade and sustainability and on plastics pollution. And in July, members basically were reviewing a draft declaration on for MC12 on trade and environmental sustainability. And I cannot emphasize how important this topic is. Trade policy has a central role to play in helping address climate change and other environmental challenges. Let us use MC12 as an opportunity to advance on many of these contemporary issues. Now, Geneva is resuming fast-paced negotiations now in September, but MC12 is rapidly approaching. We are only 3 months away, and the world rightly expects WTO members to deliver significant results for the lives and livelihoods of people. And here, I want to reiterate the importance of pragmatism and flexibility. These qualities will also be crucial with respect to the format of the conference, given the many uncertainties due to the pandemic and the sanitary conditions worldwide. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, her 4 deputy director generals, including myself, as well as the entire WTO Secretariat, have been committed and working tirelessly to help the organization and its members agree the core goals set in the 1994 Marrakesh Agreement, to use trade to improve living standards across the world, to create jobs, and to promote sustainable development. These are the goals the ESCAP countries also share. With these fundamental objectives in mind, action at the WTO this year at MC12, including in the areas that I have touched upon during my intervention, would help us build back a more sustainable and global economy, a better world. In this endeavor, I ask you for your continued support and engagement as we work together to get to the finish line. Thank you very much, and I wish you very good consultations in the next couple of days. Thank you.